Thank you for that introduction. And let me bring this over here and bring that up. Make sure everything shows up how I want it to. That looks good. Awesome. So, hey everybody. As he said, I'm JJ Asghar, developer advocate. I really do have the email address of awesome@ibm.com. So you can absolutely find me there. I am at that. And you can find me on Twitter at JJ Asghar. And we're here to talk about how we accidentally created a serverless application. I'm going to spend more time looking at code and walking you through what we did, but I have some slides to kind of just lay the groundwork of the conversation. I want this to be interactive. I want you to raise your hand and ask questions, because this is the story of something we accidentally did. And the scary part is you might find yourself on part of this journey yourself, and you can kind of see where we ended up by accident. Cool? Can I get a thumbs up? Perfect. So wait, what? You accidentally created a serverless application? That seems weird. Like, how do you do that? That's not right. So what? We had a problem in the developer advocacy team at IBM. One of the largest challenges we have is we have to teach people about new projects. I mean, how many people have run a workshop before? You know, there's logistics involved in getting cloud resources. And that was our main problem, was that we had a way we needed to use. Did you know that IBM has an IBM cloud? Not many people actually do know that, and that's kind of my problem. But we do, and I'm supposed to use it. So I had to build an infrastructure to spin up Kubernetes clusters or OpenShift clusters. And at one point, before COVID, when we were doing these all the time, I would be spinning up clusters of 50, 60 per workshop per week. And these are production level clusters. These aren't like running code-ready containers or Minikube on your laptop. This is like an actual production cluster that a customer would use. As an IBM employee, I used the IBM Cloud, of course, and it was designed for long-term production use. If you don't really know this about IBM Cloud, it's designed to be your production cloud. Unlike some AWS resources out there or some Azure resources, it's designed to be development, where you can iterate quickly on and whatever. It takes a while for IBM Cloud to come up because it's designed to do all the production level stuff on top of it. It was actually one of its strengths. We had to create some systems to work around these limitations. And recently, in updating the deployment process, we created obviously a system to do this. And we had to create this full service stack, almost by complete accident. And we have a blog post that I actually go into more detail about this, which I'll have a QR code at the end about this to show you. But we accidentally created a serverless automation platform that introduces all these different parts of the technology we used to spin up all these workshops. So, of course, we have iterations. I am very deep into the DevOps community, or at least I think I am. So, of course, we iterate on our work. And of course, the first thing we do, like with all good DevOps engineers or system engineers in cloud space, we use Bash. So we started with Bash. And if you didn't know, there's a CLI command called IBM Cloud that allows you to interface using Bash commands or Bash to the IBM Cloud with an API key. It does a ton of stuff. It's really impressive. But it's not exactly great to customize. So this was actually very close. It's a little bit different now, but very close to the way I used to spin up clusters on IBM Cloud. These are just Kubernetes clusters, if you can kind of decipher it, as you can see right there. It worked for OpenShift too. I was really happy when I figured that out. But I shouldn't really admit this out loud, but I'm going to say it because you can't actually figure out when this happened. I took down IBM Cloud with this script. Like, I actually have the incident report framed because the IC team came to me and was like, JJ, what the fuck did you do? Like, you shouldn't have done that. And I'm like, ran a bash script against our cloud? Like, what? I actually found out that I was one of the largest users of IBM Cloud at the time, and we're doing much better now. But at the time, that bash script literally took down IBM Cloud. But as you can see, it's bash, right? It calls out to IBM Cloud, makes sure it sits on the VLAN, and then does n number of times. So I would do 60 at the 60 whatever. So of course, as I did that, I had to get a little bit more advanced. As you can see, if you can read this, you don't have to read it, but it's pretty much the same thing. And I already mentioned it, but I had to put a sleep in there for a random amount of time, so I didn't send too many API commands. Then we figured out the tagging, which got really, really clever. As you can see, that's a fucking nightmare. But this is unmaintainable, right? Like, as a developer or as an operations person, yeah, if I'm doing this myself, sure, great. But if I had to give this to a teammate, I had to have some more people run it, this became cumbersome. I mean, I know I have a gray beard, I've been around the industry a while, but when I'm teaching a new grad what the sec command is, because they have no idea, that's not a good time. It's not a good time. So you get the point. And also, I actually had questions about what the ampersand meant too, and I realized I needed a lot of teaching of people. So of course, again, this was unmaintainable. So of course, at some point, you know, if you didn't know, Red Hat got bought by a small little startup called IBM. So we decided to use Ansible because we're like, well, you know, it's Red Hat. We're going to have support for this. Well, this was a disaster. It was unmaintained, and nobody used it. And it actually didn't do what we needed. It didn't have Kubernetes support. So we did not use this very long. So, of course, we went to this thing that we've talked about a couple times at this conference already. You might have heard this thing called Terraform. Yeah. Turns out the Terraform provider for IBM Cloud is actually really, really well supported, and we have multiple teams who actually support that provider. If you want to get a beer after this talk, I can tell you about why it's not in the official, what's it called, community website thing. That's a really interesting long conversation that I'm not going to do during a recorded talk. But the interesting part about Terraform is that it really did the job. It was great. But if you have never used Terraform, or if you've ever used Terraform in a team state, because as this was going, I had more and more people running clusters because I had more and more people doing it. It wasn't just me. There was a couple other people running in EMEA and in Japan, so they would spin up instances. Well, unfortunately, we had name conflicts because we had no way to share the workspaces, which became a really big problem. So we had Terraform do all the work for us, but we didn't have a way to share it because we couldn't use like S3 or whatever to share the Terraform JSON files or state files. So that got really weird. So eventually, we were like, OK, Terraform really isn't the answer. So we went back to Ansible. We were like, all right, there's got to be a way to do this. And we ended up building something called, leveraging something called AWX. If you don't know what AWX is, it's the upstream version of Ansible Tower. And we built a little application called kubeadmin on top of it that literally was designed to be a interface into AWX, which ran a simple Ansible script that did the simple requests out to IBM Cloud to spin up Kubernetes clusters back to that basic bash script you saw a few minutes ago. A buddy of mine named Mofi Rahman made it, and we still use it today. He has moved on, but there's echoes of Mofi throughout all of this stuff. But I will say, if you ever do need to play with Ansible Tower and need a command and control infrastructure, do not use AWX. Use Ansible Tower. AWX is a nightmare to run. I spent more time fuxing with that thing than actually doing my job. I should have just paid the licensing fee. And I have to pay the licensing fee. So now that we've got a way to kind of spin up all the infrastructure at a command and control system, it was OK, but we ran into a problem where we needed to start tracking. Like, I would have people come into the Slack message say, hey, JJ, we've got we need a workshop to do blah, blah, blah tomorrow, or whatever. Well, we discovered that it took about 24 hours total to spin up clusters in IBM Cloud. So if you need like 75 clusters or 100 clusters, you would take 24 hours because it would have to spin up all the infrastructure underneath it and all that. So I eventually needed a way to build this. It turns out a good friend of mine, his name was Steve Martinelli, had written basically a parser for GitHub issues internally to help spin up some other stuff. And I took that code and built my own little IBM Cloud function, which in essence is a Lambda, if that means nothing to you, that parses a GitHub issued request now and starts actually putting the requests in. So I can start tracking it, right? So, and also, if it only gets used by the tags, that means if you ask for too many clusters in too many places, it can actually say, no, you can't do it. And I'll show the example here in a moment. Like I said, I want to show you the code, but I got to lay the story first. We actually spent a little bit of time with another product inside of IBM called Schematics. And then this is just an aside of a failed story. When we were talking about that shared workspace with Terraform, Schematics is actually our offering of that. I'm going to say some stuff I shouldn't, but I'm going to say it anyway because we're all engineers, and there's a chance you might actually use this. If you know of Terraform Enterprise, and there's a workspace system inside of that where you shove it up into Terraform Enterprise and you have a shared workspace where people can pull down the state file. Schematics is the free version of that. It's on IBM Cloud, so you've got to actually use it through IBM Cloud. But that actual portion of using Terraform as a team, you can run through Schematics. And at the time, when we were trying to answer that question, it actually did its job. I was looking for the logo of this thing, and it is surprisingly hard to find. So that's why you just see the word Schematics. If you'd like to talk more about it, or curious about more about it, grab me after, and I'll walk you through the whole thing. There are some really interesting use cases with it. And it's free. So as you can tell, I haven't actually talked about serverless at all yet. I've always just talked about, a bash script and running some other stuff. But that's where CodeEngine comes into play. CodeEngine is, for lack of a better term, our next generation of Lambda. It's our way to run containers on the IBM Cloud in an ephemeral way. And this is actually where the serverless actually comes in, because we discovered as we started playing with this more and more and realizing AWX wasn't doing what we needed it to, we went back to our bash script and went back to some of the stuff and discovered we could actually just wrap this in Python with Flask and all of a sudden have an application that just sits there with an API endpoint where we need to give it a key and a bunch of resources through a JSON blob. And it just shat it out and put all the requests in. And I'll show that here in a minute. So we actually ended up with an architecture that looked pretty much this way. It's not great, I'm not going to lie, but it worked, which was the best part, right? So we had this start of this bash script, and we come along with first here, I'll just walk you through my notes here, which is someone enters with number 1 here, someone enters the request in the GitHub issue. Then the GitHub validator, which is that little function, looks at it and says, are you asking for too many clusters? Did you actually put a request in of where they're supposed to be? If it validates it, it says cool. Then it sends it out to the CodeEngine instance where it's a little grant cluster API, which basically takes all that information and then says, OK, hey, is this good? And then the actual brain of everything is this cron issue tracker that every 15 minutes scrapes this GitHub repo for issues, looks for anything tagged with ready to build, and then sends out a request, which is Python requests, to one of our other APIs that has a bunch of bash wrapped up inside of it, and then sends it either to Schematics or straight Kubernetes with AWX, and then spins up the clusters on IBM Cloud. Now, if you walk through it, you're like, oh, so it's just like 3 JSON blobs sent back and forth, ripped out from a GitHub repo, and you're like, huh, It's not much better than Bash, but I don't have to wake up at 3 in the morning, which is nice. So what did I do? I created a Rube Goldberg machine. And as I was walking through this, I realized very quickly, that's all serverless is. It's just one massive Rube Goldberg machine. So I want to warn you that if you do go down this path, you know, take a moment and realize this. So let's actually see some of this code, and it'll put more details into where we're going with this. And hopefully, if I got this right, I'll bring this over here. No, I won't. Bring this. I can't see that at all. Is it F11? I can never remember. What's the thing to make that smaller? Oh my God, I can't see it. Ah! It's a window. Is there like a minimize here? Where the hell did it go? Oh, come on. Okay, maybe that'll work. Yeah, there we go. So to kind of walk you farther through this, and this is technically proprietary. I shouldn't be doing this because it's code we use internally, but it's not like super scary. And it's, if anything, a learning experience, right, which is the most important part. So this is this repo right here, which is the actual cloud recourse requests. So as I said a few moments ago, I needed a way to track this. No longer a Slack message of, hey, doing this thing. So this is how I ended up doing, is I ended up leveraging this thing here. So if you look at some of the issues here, as you can see, I ran this for about a year and a half, and I have 605 issues of like, that's my hours no longer I had to do anything, right? So I would spend anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of my time each one of these requests, like babysitting or doing whatever. This automation took 605 versions of those out. 605 of those times I had to spend dealing with this stuff, assuming it worked how I wanted to, away. So that alone is like, that's a lot of money by just doing this, right? So let's take a look at a couple of the examples. So like for instance here, as you can see, we use the labels. That was what I was talking about earlier with the GitHub tracker. It would check and parse against the labels. We asked them to fill out some of the information here. And then I had Tico, if you know who that is. That's from Dora the Explorer. I have kids, what can I say? And it would parse it to make sure that everything fit inside the correct way, which was that, the hell is that thing called? Cloud function. And then if it all worked, it would change the to scheduled and then change to running. And if it was running and it hadn't been kicked off yet, that's when it would update it with the actual reminders and all that, and then actually spin them out 40 clusters to Tokyo, Japan. This right here would have, as I said, took me 6 to 8 hours to do. This is now, I didn't touch this at all. The automation just did the work for me, which is pretty damn cool. Also, as a user experience for all the admins out there too, they didn't need to worry about learning Bash or running any of these commands. They just came to GitHub internally, our enterprise instance, and just put in an issue. And as long as they fit the right formatting, everything worked great. That was a different conversation. I had to actually do some stuff here with the formatting. Let's see if I can find one that actually errored. Maybe this one? Oh, actually, this is one of my test ones. No. Let's go down here real quick. Maybe this one? No. OK, well, anyway, the point being is that if it would throw an error to say, hey, you've asked for too many clusters or something like that, because we discovered in this process as being one of the larger users of IBM Cloud, we couldn't actually spin up more than n number of clusters per region, per VLAN. So we actually had to put logic in there to make sure people didn't do too many. And this would actually catch it for us, which was nice. So that was that. Then the bulk of all the work, as I mentioned a few moments ago, was the Cron issue tracker, which was just basically sit there and scrape through it. And as you see here, if you know any bit of Python, you're going to laugh at me. So as you see, don't look at any of that data. That was supposed to be just scared. That was really bad. I didn't realize it was in there. So as you can see here, here's the actual cluster request, right? So if the type pulled out was OpenShift, it would just take all that payload, create a blob, and then do a post, right? So all of a sudden now, we would have, as long as we had the correct API key and we put all that stuff, it would just send that same thing as the IBM cloud request. And then if you take it a little bit farther, I can't actually show you part of this, but I can show you my demo one, which is, not that one. Where'd it go? It's not there. I didn't open it. Hang on one second. Where'd it go? Oh, come on, really? That was supposed to be my end joke there, but I guess you gotta see it. Right here. This one. So if you actually want to see, this is the internal one, right? Or external? Yeah. So this is actually my demo one, which if you look at the app.py, again, if you're any bit of Python, you're going to laugh at me. This is the other side. So we do all this logic, right, to pull all this information out of GitHub. And what do? We just dump it to OS system and do basically that, just go build the thing, which is no better than a bash script, but now I don't have to do the work, which is great. And that's in essence it, right? Like it became something useful. It made life easier. And what is this but a serverless app? What is a serverless app? It's not something that just takes a JSON blob or a blob and does some funging of the numbers. And that's what I did. So let's see. I believe this is the, or was this the same one I was just showing? Yeah, it was. I was going to think about showing you how to deploy something. Oh no, that was for my next talk. Never mind. But as you can see, I mean, it just pulls all this information. And then walks through each one of them. And then hopefully I can show you at least one of them. Nope, I can't. Don't look at that. The post a comment was important off of this too, because obviously as a user, you need to know if you've done something wrong. As soon as we figure out easy way to post directly to the API, everything got great. But that's it. OK, so. Let's go back over here. So was it worth it? Honestly, it really was. We had to go on a massive journey for this. We started with Bash, played with Ansible, played with Terraform, eventually came back to Bash with Python wrapped around it. But eventually, obviously, you see the approve here, and the idea was to eventually have /approve, and more people who were starting to use this, so it wasn't just automatically done. But there was this thing called a pandemic that happened that kind of slowed down this project because obviously people don't want to come together, apart from here, of course. But at the time, we had less and less workshops, so this kind of went stale. I do use this occasionally for my friends in Japan because they still run workshops there. For whatever reason, the Japanese have really taken to remote workshopping, if that's a word. But in the US and EMEA, nobody really does that anymore. Hopefully soon, we'll see. Maybe I'll come back and teach y'all something about Kubernetes. Thank you. Again, awesome at IBM.com. And take a picture of that QR code, and that's the actual blog post that I go into more details and tell a little bit more about the story. Thank you.